He never complained. He never posted a video. He never called the local news. He never blocked a gate or started a protest. He just switched brands. And 4 years later, a regional director from Titan Field Systems drove nearly 4 hours across Kansas to stand in his driveway and ask a single question. How did one farmer convince an entire county to stop buying our machines? The answer started with a fault code. It was a cold Wednesday morning in October of 2020. The sky over central Kansas had that flat gray color that arrives just before the harvest wind starts pushing across the plains. Ethan Cole was in the cab of his Titan X9 combine, cutting wheat on the second full day of harvest. The machine had run perfectly the day before. Clean grain, steady engine load, no vibration, nothing unusual. Until the screen lit up. A red warning symbol appeared on the display, then a message: transmission pressure fault. The combine shut itself down, right there in the middle of the south field. The engine idled for a moment, then dropped into safe mode, and the machine that had cost Ethan $286,000 sat still in the wheat stubble while the Kansas wind moved across the field without it. Ethan didn't swear. He didn't slam the steering wheel. He just turned the key off and climbed down the ladder. The soil was dry under his boots. The wheat rows stretched out behind the combine in long, clean lines that ended exactly where the machine had stopped. Half the field still stood untouched. And every farmer knows what that means during harvest. It means time. Ethan pulled his phone from his pocket and called the Titan dealership on Highway 56 outside Great Bend. The service advisor answered on the third ring. Ethan described the fault code exactly as it appeared on the screen. The advisor listened, then said the combine would need to come into the shop for inspection. Ethan nodded to himself. "All right," he said, "I'll bring it in." By late afternoon, the combine was sitting in the dealership service bay, and Ethan was driving his pickup truck back toward his farm. That drive was when the calculation started. Every farmer knows the calculation. Days, acres, weather, moisture levels, and the thin line between a delay that stays manageable and a delay that starts costing real money. Harvest windows in Kansas don't stay open forever. A storm can close them. Humidity can slow them. And when a machine goes down, the clock starts running whether you want it to or not. Ethan knew that, so he ran the numbers in his head while the road rolled past his windshield. If the combine was down 2 days, he could make it up. 3 days would be tight. 4 days meant longer nights. 5 days meant the margin started shrinking. By the time he turned into his gravel driveway, he had reached the same conclusion every farmer reaches during harvest breakdowns. The margin was narrow, and getting narrower every hour the machine sat in that service bay. 2 days later, the dealership called. The diagnosis came in early Thursday morning. The service advisor explained that a pressure valve assembly inside the transmission system had failed. It was a known issue on that series of machines. Parts would need to be replaced. Ethan asked the only question that mattered. How long? The advisor checked something on his computer, then said, "We can have it back to you Monday." Ethan did the math again. Monday was not good, but it was still possible. "Monday works," he said, and he hung up. For the rest of the day, he worked around the broken combine. He ran his smaller machines. He shifted labor. He adjusted the harvest plan the way farmers always adjust when equipment fails. Because time lost during harvest can still be recovered, if the machine comes back soon enough. What Ethan didn't know yet was that Monday was not going to be the real problem. The real problem was going to arrive on Friday afternoon, and it was going to begin with a single word: denial. Friday afternoon arrived quietly. The kind of quiet that sits over rural Kansas once the workday begins to slow down. Ethan was standing inside his equipment shed when the phone rang. He looked at the screen. Titan Field Systems, the dealership. He answered. Hello? The voice on the other end was Mark Jensen, the service manager. Ethan, I've got a situation with your combine repair. Ethan leaned against the workbench. What kind of situation? Mark hesitated for a moment. Not long, but long enough. Then he said it. The warranty claim was denied. Some words land differently than others. They arrive with a weight that forces your mind to stop for a second and process what you just heard. Denied was one of those words. Ethan didn't react right away. He simply asked the next question. On what basis? Mark cleared his throat. The warranty authorization team flagged a service issue in the hydraulic system. Ethan waited. They're saying the transmission fluid currently in the machine tests outside Titan's approved specification range. Ethan looked across the shed at the empty space where the combine normally sat. Then he said something very calmly. Mark, every service on that machine has been done by your dealership. Oil changes, hydraulic service, transmission maintenance, all of it, for 4 years. Mark exhaled slowly. I know that. Ethan continued. So if there's fluid in that system that doesn't meet Titan's specification, where exactly did it come from? The silence on the phone lasted several seconds, long enough to become its own kind of answer. Finally, Mark said, the authorization team says the fluid sample is outside spec. That's the only basis they provided. Ethan asked another question. Is it possible your technician used the wrong fluid at the last service interval? Mark did not answer immediately. When he finally spoke, his voice was lower. I'm going to look into that. Ethan nodded, even though Mark couldn't see him. I would appreciate that. Then he hung up. The equipment shed was quiet again. Outside, the Kansas wind moved across the fields the same way it had every harvest season Ethan could remember. But inside the shed, something had shifted. Not anger, not frustration, something colder, understanding. Ethan had paid $286,000 for that combine. He had serviced it exclusively through the authorized Titan dealership. Every oil change, every maintenance interval, every fluid replacement. 4 years of records. And now the company that built the machine was refusing to cover a repair because of fluid that very likely came from the same authorized service network that had been maintaining it. Saturday morning the phone rang again. Mark from the dealership. I checked the service records, he said. And? Mark hesitated again. The internal investigation came back inconclusive. Ethan almost smiled, not because it was funny, but because he understood exactly what that word meant. Inconclusive meant the truth existed somewhere in the system, but nobody was willing to write it down. What's the repair cost? Ethan asked. Mark answered quietly, $9,860. Parts, labor, system flush, valve assembly replacement, everything required to make the combine run again. Ethan asked one final question. Your technician serviced that transmission in February, correct? Yes. You can't prove the fluid issue came from your shop? No. Ethan paused, then asked the question that mattered. Can you prove it didn't? Mark said nothing. The silence was answer enough. Ethan spoke again. I want the machine ready Monday like we discussed. Mark said, it will be. I'll pay the $9,860 under protest, Ethan continued, and I want written documentation of the warranty denial. Mark sighed. I'll have the paperwork ready. Thank you, Ethan said. Then he ended the call. He walked into the house and found Laura sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee. She looked up. How bad? Ethan sat down across from her. $9,860. Laura nodded slowly. And 12 days of harvest. She watched his face. What are you going to do? Ethan looked out the kitchen window toward the empty space in the equipment shed. For several seconds he didn't say anything. Then he spoke. I'm going to finish harvest. Laura waited. And after that? Ethan turned back toward her. After that, I'm going to make a decision. The way he said it told Laura everything she needed to know. The decision had already been made. He was simply waiting for the right moment to carry it out. Monday morning arrived exactly as promised. The Titan dealership called just after 8. The combine was ready. Ethan drove into town in his pickup, signed the paperwork, and wrote a check for $9,860 from the equipment account he had kept for years. The service advisor slid the receipt across the counter. The warranty denial paperwork sat behind it. Ethan folded both documents neatly and placed them inside a manila folder. That folder already contained 4 years of service records, every oil change, every maintenance interval, every invoice from the same dealership that had now told him the problem was inconclusive. Ethan didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. He simply took the folder, climbed into the combine, and drove it back to his farm. Harvest still needed to be finished, and time lost during harvest can only be recovered one way: hours. Long ones. Ethan worked until late every night that week, running lights across the fields, covering acres that should have been finished days earlier. But by the end of October, the wheat was in, the bins were full, and the season was complete. That evening, Ethan sat alone at the kitchen table. The manila folder lay open in front of him. The $9,860 receipt sat on top. Below it was the warranty denial. Below that were the dealership service records. 4 full years. Every maintenance interval performed by the same authorized Titan service department. Ethan studied the documents the way a careful farmer studies numbers, not looking for emotion, looking for accuracy, for the real accounting underneath the situation. After a long time he closed the folder and made a phone call, but it wasn't to Titan, it was to a farm equipment dealer outside Hutchinson, Prairie Ridge Equipment. The owner's name was Neil Mercer, a man who had been selling and servicing farm machinery in central Kansas for nearly 20 years. They talked for 15 minutes about machines, about trade values, about delivery timelines. Nothing dramatic, just numbers. 3 weeks later, the Titan machines left Ethan Cole's farm. All of them. The combine, the large tractor, and the smaller utility unit he had used for nearly a decade. They were hauled away one by one on flatbed trailers bound for an equipment reseller outside Wichita. The Prairie Ridge machines arrived in early December, brand new. Different controls, different layout, different engineering philosophy. Ethan spent the first few weeks learning them the way experienced farmers learn any unfamiliar equipment. Slowly, carefully, without rushing judgment. By the end of the first winter, he had reached a simple conclusion. The Prairie Ridge machines were good machines, not perfect, not dramatically better than Titan in every measurable category, but good, reliable, and backed by a service shop that handled problems directly when they appeared. For Ethan, that mattered, because the most important test of a service department isn't how it behaves when everything works, it's how it behaves when something goes wrong. The first conversation about the switch happened in September of the following year, at the grain elevator outside Great Bend. A farmer named Daniel Ruiz noticed the Prairie Ridge combine and asked the obvious question, "Ethan, since when are you running Prairie Ridge?" Ethan explained. He started with the fault code in the south field, then the warranty denial, then the fluid specification issue, then the $9,860 repair bill, and finally the goodwill credit Titan had offered afterward, $4,000 against nearly 10. Daniel listened without interrupting. When Ethan finished, Daniel asked one question. "You angry about it?" Ethan shook his head. "Anger doesn't change numbers." Daniel nodded slowly. "Well, that's something to think about." Ethan didn't add anything else. He wasn't trying to convince anyone. He simply answered the question that had been asked. Over the next 18 months, 10 other farmers asked the same question, at grain elevators, at equipment auctions, at feed stores. Each time Ethan told the story exactly the same way, starting with the fault code, ending with the decision to switch. No exaggeration, no campaign, just the numbers. Starting with the fault code, ending with the decision to switch. No exaggeration, no campaign, just the numbers. And because the story was consistent, and because it came from a man people trusted, it traveled, quietly, across coffee tables and machine sheds and fence lines, moving through the farming community the way information always moves in rural places, along existing lines of trust. By the end of 2024, something unusual had happened in that part of Kansas. Titan Field Systems sales had dropped. Not suddenly, not dramatically all at once, but steadily, month after month, year after year, until the numbers told a story of their own. A 31% decline in new equipment purchases across the county. And somewhere inside Titan's regional sales office, someone was about to notice. The report landed on Daniel Mercer's desk on a gray Monday morning in January of 2025. It was a standard regional sales summary, the kind of document most managers review quickly, sign off on, and move past before lunch. Daniel did not move past it, because one number in that report refused to sit quietly on the page. 31%. That was the decline in Titan Field Systems equipment sales across one county in central Kansas compared to the 2020 baseline. Not one quarter, not one bad season, 4 straight years. A slow, steady drop in purchases across a farming community Titan had sold to for decades. Daniel leaned back in his chair and looked at the chart again. Markets do not drift downward like that without a reason. Not in rural counties. Not where farmers stay with a brand for years, sometimes generations, unless something pushes them hard enough to leave. Weather can explain one year. Interest rates can explain another. Commodity prices can tighten buying decisions for a season or two. But this was different. This was concentrated, persistent, and strangely local. There was no major employer closure in the county, no new competitor dealership opening nearby, no sudden demographic shift in the regional agricultural data, no obvious explanation large enough to account for a 31% decline. So Daniel started digging. He pulled dealership sales records, customer retention reports, trade-in histories, service department notes, warranty claims, everything Titan's internal system could give him about that county and the farms operating inside it. For 3 days he worked through the data, not quickly, carefully, the way people work when they know the answer exists somewhere but refuses to show itself all at once. By the third afternoon, the pattern began to emerge, not as a single event, as a cluster. A group of farms that had moved away from Titan equipment over roughly the same period. Different acreage, different crops, different family operations, but connected in the way rural communities are always connected, by neighbors, by shared fence lines, by grain elevators, by church parking lots, by the long memory of people who still ask each other what happened before they sign the next equipment note. Daniel opened a map, then a customer relationship screen, then a second map, then a spreadsheet, and when he cross-referenced the names enough times, one name kept appearing at the center of the pattern: Ethan Cole. Daniel opened Ethan's customer file. It went back years. Multiple Titan purchases, routine maintenance, no unusual disputes, no history of chronic complaints. The file looked exactly like the file of a customer companies assume they will keep forever. Then Daniel reached the spring of 2020, and the tone of the file changed. The combine repair, the transmission pressure issue, the fluid specification dispute, the denied warranty claim, the repair cost, $9,860. Daniel kept reading. He found the regional review notes. A goodwill offer of $2,500, declined. He found the corporate customer relations record. A second offer, $4,100 in future purchase credit, declined. Then he found the final note in the file. Customer declined all offers. No further contact requested. Daniel read that line twice. Then he went back to the beginning and read the whole file again. Slower the second time, because something in it felt wrong. Farmers do not abandon a machine platform casually. They do not change combines, tractors, attachments, service relationships, and parts ecosystems on a whim. Not after years of brand familiarity. Not unless the cost of staying has become harder to justify than the cost of leaving. Daniel picked up the phone and called the Titan dealership outside Great Bend. Mark Jensen answered. Daniel introduced himself and got straight to the point. I'm reviewing Ethan Cole's 2020 Combine file. A pause. Then Mark said, I remember that one. Daniel kept his voice even. The fluid issue. Where did it come from? Mark hesitated, then gave the same answer the system had recorded 4 years earlier. The investigation was inconclusive. Daniel turned his chair slightly and looked at the service history on his screen. Every transmission service on Ethan's machine had been performed by that same dealership. Every fluid interval, every maintenance entry. 4 years. Mark, Daniel said, your shop serviced that transmission system for 4 straight years. Yes. The fluid tested outside Titan specification. Yes. Daniel let a second pass, then said what the file had been saying all along. So either Ethan Cole put the wrong fluid in that machine himself, or someone in your shop did. The silence that followed was longer this time, long enough to feel less like hesitation and more like surrender. When Mark finally spoke, his voice was lower. My technician used the wrong fluid grade during a service interval in early 2020. Daniel did not answer immediately. Then he asked the next question. And you suspected that at the time? Mark exhaled. Yes. And the report still went through as inconclusive? I didn't have written confirmation. Daniel looked down at the sales report again. 31%. The number sat there with a different meaning now. Not a market problem, not random customer churn, not ordinary competition. The number was the cost of a truth no one had wanted to write down. Titan had saved a few $1,000s on one denied warranty claim, but the denial had done something far more expensive. It had broken trust with one farmer, and that farmer had told the truth about what happened, not loudly, not publicly, just accurately, to people who trusted him. In cities, companies track sentiment through dashboards and complaints. In rural counties, sentiment moves another way. It moves through conversations. A man at a grain elevator asking why another man switched brands. A neighbor standing beside a machine shed after sunset. A wife hearing a number at the kitchen table and remembering it later when another family asks about equipment. Daniel understood then that Titan's customer system had recorded transactions, but not trust. And trust was the part that had carried the story farther than any report in front of him could fully measure. He asked Mark for one final thing. "I need a written statement confirming what you just told me." Mark was quiet. Then he said, "All right." The call ended. Daniel sat in his office for a long time after that. The sales chart was still open. Ethan Cole's customer file was still open. And now, for the first time, the line connecting them was unmistakable. One denied repair in 2020. One farmer who paid $9,860 for a problem he should not have been forced to pay for. One quiet decision to leave the brand, and then year after year of consequences moving through a county in ways Titan had never bothered to understand. Daniel looked at Ethan Cole's address, a farm outside Great Bend, nearly 4 hours from Wichita. He looked at it for a long moment. Then he printed the file, closed his laptop, picked up his keys, and made a decision that was not written in any company protocol. He would go there himself. Because some things cannot be repaired by email. Some things cannot be corrected by a credit offer. And some truths have to be carried all the way to a kitchen table by the person finally willing to say them out loud. Daniel Mercer left Wichita before sunrise. The highway was nearly empty that morning in late February of 2025. 4 hours of road stretched ahead of him across the Kansas plains. The sky was still dark when he started the engine. By the time the first light appeared on the horizon, he was already miles outside the city. Fields passed on both sides of the highway, flat land, fence lines, windbreak trees standing bare against the winter sky. Daniel had spent the previous week reading Ethan Cole's file, twice. He knew every number, every conversation, every decision recorded in Titan's system. But a file on a screen was not the same thing as the man who lived at the address written at the top of it. And the further Daniel drove, the more he understood something that the company's reports had never been designed to show. This was not just a warranty dispute. It was a broken relationship. And broken relationships do not repair themselves through paperwork. The final 20 minutes of the drive took him off the highway and onto county roads. Gravel in some places, cracked pavement in others, fields still brown from the previous harvest, wind moving through dry stalks left standing in the distance. Daniel turned into the driveway just before 9 in the morning. A farmhouse stood near the road. A large equipment shed sat farther back beside a line of storage bins, and parked beside the shed was a Prairie Ridge combine. Ethan Cole was standing in the doorway of the shed when the company vehicle rolled to a stop. He had seen the SUV coming down the road, seen the Titan logo on the door, seen the man step out wearing a company jacket. Daniel walked toward the shed. Ethan waited. The wind moved across the yard between them. Finally, Daniel stopped a few feet away. "My name is Daniel Mercer," he said. "I'm the regional director for Titan Field Systems." Ethan studied him for a moment. "I know who you are." Daniel blinked slightly. "You do?" Ethan nodded. "You called the Great Bend dealership last week." "Word travels around here." Daniel absorbed that for a moment. Then he said the only thing he had driven 4 hours to say. "I'd like to talk with you if you're willing." Ethan looked at him for several seconds. Then he turned toward the house. "Come inside." Laura was already in the kitchen when they walked in. Ethan introduced them briefly. Laura nodded and began pouring coffee into 3 mugs. They sat down at the same kitchen table where Ethan had once laid out the $9,860 repair receipt, the same table where he had decided to sell every Titan machine he owned. Daniel placed a folder on the table. Then he slid a single document out of it, a check, made out to Ethan Cole, $9,860. Daniel spoke carefully. "I've reviewed your entire file. I've spoken with the dealership, and I have written confirmation that the wrong transmission fluid was used during a service interval in early 2020. The warranty denial was wrong," he continued. "The way the dealership handled it was wrong, and the way our customer relations department handled it afterward was wrong. I'm here to apologize." The kitchen went quiet. The kind of quiet that arrives when a sentence finally lands after years of waiting. Ethan looked at the check. Then he looked at Daniel. "It took 4 years." Daniel nodded. "Yes." Ethan tapped the check lightly with one finger. "What do you want in return?" Daniel shook his head. "Nothing. This isn't a credit toward another purchase. It isn't conditional. It isn't a negotiation. It's simply the money that should have been in your account in 2020. Laura leaned back slightly in her chair. "What about the 31%? Daniel turned toward her. She continued calmly. "Does Titan understand what that number means?" Daniel hesitated, then answered honestly. "It means one honest account of a mistake traveled farther through this county than any advertising campaign we could have run." Laura nodded. "People out here talk to each other. And when someone tells the truth about something that happened, people remember." Daniel nodded slowly. "I understand that now." Ethan picked up the check, looked at it once more, then set it back down on the table. "Not switching back," he said. Daniel answered immediately. "I didn't come here to ask you to." "Your new machines run well?" Daniel asked. Ethan nodded toward the shed outside. "They do the job. That's what matters." Ethan stood and extended his hand. Daniel shook it. "I'll tell people you came," Ethan said. Daniel gave a small nod. "Tell them whatever you think is accurate." Ethan looked at him steadily. "I'll tell them you drove 4 hours, brought the right number, and said you were sorry." Daniel let out a quiet breath. "That would be accurate." He thanked Laura for the coffee. Then he walked back outside. The Kansas wind had picked up slightly. Ethan watched from the kitchen window as the SUV disappeared down the county road. When the dust settled, he picked up the check from the table, walked to the small office beside the kitchen, and placed it inside the manila folder with the rest of the documents. The repair bill, the warranty denial, the goodwill offers, and now the final correction. The accounting was complete. A few minutes later, Ethan walked back to the equipment shed, started the Prairie Ridge Combine, and drove out toward the fields. He had never needed Titan to come to his door to know the numbers had always been wrong. He had never needed the apology to know the decision he made in 2020 had been the right one. But sometimes, it still matters when the right number finally finds its way back home.